I always knew my sisters could be selfish, but I never thought they'd go this far. It all started with the fact that I bought myself a small house on the coast. It was my personal corner of tranquility, a place where I could escape from the daily hustle and bustle and just relax. I had worked for many years to afford this luxury, and I was incredibly proud that I finally had something of my own. My sisters, Laura and Melissa, have always been jealous of me. They got married quite early and got used to their husbands providing for them. However, their families constantly faced financial difficulties because they lived beyond their means, spending money on expensive things they could not afford. Unlike them, I lived modestly, saved, and invested in the future. When they found out about my house, their reaction was predictable. "It's just an empty place," Laura said. "Why don't you let us rent it out?" "We could make money from it," Melissa chimed in. Their argument was that the house was idle most of the time anyway, and they could turn it into a profitable business. I immediately declined. "This house is my personal space. I don't want strangers living in it," I replied. But my sisters weren't going to give up so easily. They started to put pressure on me, claiming that I was selfish, that my family needed help, that everything was fine as it was. But they had problems. I remained adamant. After a few weeks, I discovered that they were trying to get around me. They posted an ad about renting out my house on several rental websites. I was shocked. They even made appointments with people, hoping that I wouldn't find out about it. I immediately took down all the ads and warned them that if they continued like this, I would take action. And then the most interesting thing began. One weekend, I went to my house to get some rest. But when I arrived, I saw that the door had been broken into. Inside, everything was turned over and several things were missing. Furious, I called the police. The surveillance cameras showed that they were my sister's husbands. They broke down the door and tried to bring in furniture, preparing to rent out the house. The police detained them, and now they face serious charges. My sisters are hysterical. They demand that I withdraw the application, begging me not to destroy their families. But you know what? They didn't think about my family or my feelings when they tried to use me. They didn't think about the consequences when their husbands committed a crime. Now the most difficult part begins. The legal consequences. Their husbands face charges of trespassing, property damage, and attempted fraud. The lawyers are already working on the case, and I am being asked to file a civil lawsuit to compensate for the damage. I've been thinking about this for a long time. Is it worth going all the way? But looking at the photos of the destroyed house, I realized that forgiveness is not always the right way. The family started to put pressure on me. My parents called every day, saying that I was ruining the relationship, that I was killing my sister's families. They said that Laura and Melissa's husbands had made a mistake, that I should show compassion. But where was their compassion for me? Where were my sisters when they decided they could dispose of my property without my knowledge? They saw in me only a resource, a person who could be used. I decided not to give in to the pressure. The trial began, and my sister's lawyers tried to portray their husbands as victims of circumstances. But the facts spoke for themselves, the evidence, the video recordings, the broken door. The judge was not inclined to be soft. As a result, their husbands received suspended sentences and are obliged to compensate me for the damage. It was a moral victory for me. However, my family finally turned their backs on me. They consider me a traitor, a man who put the law above the family. It doesn't surprise me. But now I realize that a real family is not those who are related to you by blood, but those who respect you and your boundaries. After the trial, my sisters continued to try to put pressure on me. They wrote long messages blaming me for their misfortunes. They had to find jobs themselves to pay the bills, and their husbands now bore the stigma of criminals. But I didn't feel guilty. They chose this path themselves. After a few months, I went to the house for a few weeks to restore order and take my mind off the stress. At that moment, I realized how important personal boundaries are. For me, this house was a symbol of independence and freedom. In the evenings, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, I felt incredibly relieved. I've started a new chapter in my life. Over time, I made new friends, people who really appreciated and respected me. I realized that blood kinship is not always a guarantee of real support. Family is those who appreciate you and don't use you for their own purposes. The sisters didn't try to get in touch anymore. My parents stopped calling too. Maybe they thought I was a traitor, but I knew the truth. I was just protecting myself. Sometimes justice is not about forgiveness, but about protecting your borders and your life. I'm happy now. I have a stable job, reliable friends, and most importantly, I've learned to appreciate myself. Sometimes I think about the past, but it no longer has power over me. Now my life is my rules, my boundaries, my freedom. Time has passed, and I am finally convinced that people who are willing to step over you for their own benefit do not deserve your kindness. I've built a new life without toxic relatives. And you know what? I'm happy.